Hi there. So today we will be going over general information and notice to consumers. So let me share my screen and I can review it with you. Okay, so this is an updated form. It was updated January 5th of 2026. And this is just in general information for either sellers, buyers, or um, landlords or renters. Okay, so if the property is um, outside of the city limits, there is a good chance that it could be annexed. I will let you know if that's the case with the particular property we are dealing with. Appraisal. The buyer's lender may order an appraisal to ensure that the house is worth what they're paying for, or at least a certain amount. Okay. It is not an inspection. Brokers. A real estate broker may represent a party, buyer, tenant, landlord, or seller in a real estate transaction, or as an intermediary where they don't take sides, they simply make sure that the transaction is completed in a legal and proper way. For example, I would represent you as my client, and if we wind up in a transaction with another agent that's also in my office, then my boss, my broker, would be an intermediary. He couldn't take sides. I would still be assigned to help you, give you advice and opinions. Please excuse my dog. And but my broker cannot take sides, give advice or opinion, or reveal any outside information. Okay. Now, we are not inspectors. We don't possess the expertise to conduct inspections. We can't make any representations. We're encouraged. We also are not attorneys. We cannot give you legal advice. We can explain contracts to you and then give you our suggestions. But if you have a legal question, we cannot give you legal advice. So we would, of course, encourage you to talk to an attorney to understand the legal consequences or provisions of a contract. Okay, if you have any other questions that go deeper than what we can give you. We're also required to provide a form called Information About Brokerage Services, which defines what our role is in the transaction. That's a different form. Compensation. So how do people get paid? So I would be compensated either by the seller, the buyer, okay? And we do not have a fixed way of how we get paid. We also cannot put it in the multiple listing service. So we have to be in communication directly with the other party on how everybody's going to get paid. And it's fully negotiable, okay? We independently determine our fees. So my fee is 6% as a buyer's agent. As a seller's agent, I charge 6%, but I have to pay half of that to the other agent as compensation for bringing us the buyer when I work for the seller. Now, other agents, now if I work for you as a buyer's agent, then I would have to reach out to the seller for compensation. And if they cannot compensate me, then I would have to ask you for compensation. Of course, before you would even make an offer, you would know exactly where you stand when it comes to that sort of thing. Okay. Concrete issues, alkali silica reaction. So this is also known as concrete cancer. It's a chemical reaction that happens when certain types of concrete are in constant exposure to moisture, like foundation slabs, swimming pools, retaining walls. Okay, this was a lot more common. I believe I looked it up, and it was a lot more common built in houses built from the 50s to the 80s. They have a higher risk zone according to ChatGPT. But do your own research if you're worried. Now, over time, the damage may render the pool unusable or unsafe. You can always get testing for that if that is a concern for you. Okay. And you can always talk to an attorney for guidance or disclosures or obligations. All right. Environmental concerns. You can always you can always get things tested for lead-based paint, asbestos, mold, pesticides, radon gas, toxic waste, underground storage tanks, urea, formaldehyde, insulation, and other pollutants. Okay. Your general home inspection will say, if they see any signs of mold. And of course, whenever, even mold in the shower, you're going to see, right? But usually we see people wanting to get mold testing when it's pretty extensive, but that's completely the buyer's choice. Okay. You can also get environmental inspections for different things like also like oak wilt and diseased trees. Now, in certain areas in Texas where you have a lot of basements, radon gas is also a thing. You can also look for noise. So, for example, if you're in areas that are very noisy, that are near airports, railways, highways, restaurants, bars, schools, arenas, and construction. So we encourage buyers to drive around those areas during different times of day. Okay. Expansive soils. Soil conditions can vary greatly because you're dealing with different soil types. In Texas, in El Paso, there are certain areas where you have higher clay or caliche in the soil. So you tend to see more shifting in the foundation. Now, seasonal changes can also cause that. And especially when you buy new construction, you'll see settling. You'll see what they call hairline cracks. What the builder will tell you are hairline cracks. Now, every builder has their own kind of rule of thumb. I've heard a lot of builders say if the cracks are wide enough to put two quarters in, then you should alert them. That's more significant. But if you see little thin cracks, those are more hairline. Again, I am not an expert in that, but if that's a concern for you, absolutely. The home inspector will also tell you if they see something that looks to be normal or typical, or if there's grounds for you to call an engineer or have it inspected a little bit more thoroughly. Okay. FIRPTA. So Foreign Investment in a Real Estate Tax Act of 1980. So if a seller is a foreign person, they may hold back automatically 15% of the proceeds for federal taxes. Then the foreign person would probably be required to file tax returns. And then at that point, they would reconcile, part of that 15% if anything, okay? And then what's a foreign person? They're defined as a non-resident alien individual, foreign corporation that has not made an election under Section 897I of the Internal Revenue Code to be treated as a domestic corporation or a foreign partnership, trust, or estate. It does not include resident alien individual. The seller should notify the buyer whether the seller is a foreign national. Okay. So now if the seller is uninsured, then they need to talk to a tax professional or an attorney. Okay. Flood hazard, floodways, flood insurance. There are flood zones in El Paso. So one of the things that we do recommend is that while you are still under your option period, right, your termination option, to check to see if it's in a flood zone, and then you can still buy flood insurance even if you're not in a flood zone. That is always your choice. Okay. Now there is a separate form for special flood areas if you happen to fall into that area. Foreign buyers and renters. So there's a certain property code, chapter 5, subchapter H, that says certain buyers and renters are prohibited from purchasing. Okay. Whether you fall into that category, I cannot determine. You would need to talk to an attorney for that. And of course, look up that property code. If the house is in a historic or a conservation district, it may limit or restrict your use of architecture and what you can do with the property. So you may want to check if we do wind up in a historic district, then we'll need to provide that information for you so you're aware of what things you can and cannot do with that property. Same with conservation. We don't see conservation as much. We see more historic. Okay. All right. Inspection, repairs, and walkthrough. A buyer is encouraged to do an inspection, and we can exercise the termination option to negotiate repairs. Now, it's very important that if a buyer can accompany the inspector, they should, and ask any questions they have, because we are not inspectors. We don't have the knowledge or expertise for those kind of things. If a buyer requests name of inspectors or repair professionals from us, the buyer should note that we are not making any representation as far as how good they are, okay, whether it be the inspectors or the repair people. Repairs. The buyer and seller should resolve in writing, put in writing anything that they agree to before the option period extends. Do not rely on verbal extensions. Walkthrough. Before the close of the sale, the buyer should walk through the property to make sure that all repairs are completed and the property is in similar condition as what it was when the buyer first looked at it, okay? If it's in a mandatory owners association, also known as an HOA, homeowners association, we have a special form for that. Buyers should know that there may be applicable restrictions, bylaws, rules. There's going to be a resale certificate, and the buyer may be responsible for the cost of getting that information. Now, membership also includes paying periodic dues, either monthly, quarterly, yearly. If the new owner fails to pay those, they could have a lien on the house or even get foreclosed on. Now, if it's a tenant situation, they also may be required to comply with their rules, okay? And subject to fines for failure to do so. Mineral rights. So determining who owns the mineral rights, for example, oil or gas, normally requires an expert to review the chain of title. We don't see that in El Paso. That's like when you have oil wells, really, okay? So that's determined in a separate agreement, and we have a form for that. Multiple listing service. The multiple listing service is a database where we put all the information. We're required to put when a house goes under contract, when it closes, what it's sold for, because the subscribers use this platform so that they can appraise and use this information for market evaluation purposes. Okay. So much of the information like square footage, value, taxes, boundaries, school years, we pull that information from other sources. So if there's something that's very, very important to you, you should not rely on those secondary sources. It's important for you to verify independently that information, okay? Permits. Permits may be required for construction, alteration, and improvement. Like I know that, for example, with swimming pools. If you want to build a pool, you should know if you should be able to build one. And the survey will tell you that. And then, of course, contacting the city zoning for that as well. Possession. Buyer will not get keys to the property unless the property has closed, everybody has signed, and it has funded, which means the title company has received money from the buyer and from the lender if there's a lender. Keys and possession will not be handed over until both of those happen, unless we have a written agreement separately. If the seller needs to stay longer, they need to have a seller's temporary lease. If the buyer wants to move in before funding, we need to have a buyer temporary lease, but it has to be in writing. Insurance. Get a quote for insurance before your termination option is over as a buyer, because if your insurance winds up being too expensive, you might not wind up being able to purchase the house, or your payment might be much, much higher than you had originally planned for, okay? There's different kinds of insurance, different deductibles, different coverages. Buyer may also want to get insurance quote, okay? Now, if a buyer waits until the last minute to get insurance, it could delay their ability to close on time. All right. Now, residential service contract. Oh, let me go up. Property values, that was at the very bottom. We cannot promise you that a house will appreciate a certain amount in a certain time frame, okay? The market is cyclical, values do fluctuate. And if the buyer is willing to buy and the seller is willing to sell for a specific amount, then that is between them. Now, buyers, I think a lot of times think, well, that's not that the house isn't worth this much money. The house is worth whatever a buyer and the seller are willing to pay to agree to, basically. Okay, that's what market value is. Residential service contract. This is also known as a home warranty. So the residential service contract, there's different companies. It has the annual fee. It has a service call fee. And depending on the coverage, there could be additional fees to make up for extra expenses. So we can give you different names, but we cannot promise you that one company is better than the other or that it'll guarantee any specific things. So we usually give a few options and we let the buyer decide what they want to use. Okay. Usually covers heating, cooling, electrical, plumbing, that kind of thing. Okay. Restrictions on a property near an international border. So be aware that in certain counties near the border, El Paso, there are certain laws that may prohibit the sale of a property because it lacks water or sewer. Even the sale of such property is permitted, a buyer may face additional costs or restrictions because they don't have those things, or even roads. Okay. So we do have a lot of open spaces and a lot of land out here that got sold once upon a time. And then people come back later and say, we want to, sell this property, but there are no roads to the property. Okay. So that could be a limitation. School boundaries. If the buyers are worried about what schools their children will go to, they need to call the school district directly. We have, we pull information from the MLS, but it's only as accurate as the input. Sometimes agents enter accurate information, sometimes they don't. Sometimes school boundaries do change. So that's why it's always important, especially in newer construction areas. We see those school boundaries change all the time. Okay. Septic tanks and on-site sewer facilities. Many properties have sewer tanks or septic. We have to give you information on sewer site facility form. Okay. I rarely deal with those, but it comes up occasionally. All right, sex offenders and criminal activity. Neither a seller nor a landlord's agent has a duty to disclose. There's the website you can go on to. You can contact your local police department. Just know that even when you go in there and you take a look, it may say that there are no sex offenders in the area, but there's no promise that it'll stay that way. Okay. Square footage. If you are buying a house because it has a very specific square footage, you should independently verify that because we pull informations from the central appraisal, that the tax office or appraisers or builders, and sometimes that's only an estimate. Special tax district, we call those either MUDs or PIDs. Municipal utility district is when you have a certain area that has a specific, like let's say water company for just that area. So there's a special a tax assessment involved with that. There's certain areas in Horizon that have that. Public improvement district, we see that in newer areas where for a certain number of years there's going to be an extra tax attached to your tax bill to pay for that. Usually it's very low, but we will let you know when we come across one of those. All right, surveillance. Be aware that seller might be recording you, either audio or video or both, without your consent. And also a buyer might photograph or record a property without the seller's knowledge. Everybody should consult an attorney before doing so. Okay. Survey. Survey outlines the boundaries, any improvements like buildings, any fence lines, driveways, encroachments, easements, other items on the property. We will always try to get a survey for you early enough so that you can see if there's any issues there. The contract will typically contain a provision which identifies who is responsible, and that Texas contracts do. All right. Synthetic stucco. This is something that was used for a time, and it was a problem because when it's not properly installed, moisture can get behind the stucco and cause wood rot. We don't see that in El Paso so much because we don't have a lot of moisture. Okay, but this form is for all of Texas, which is quite big, right? Tax prorations. The buyer will get a credit from the seller's proceeds at closing for a tax credit. Now, just remember, as a buyer, you may not inherit the tax exemptions that the seller has. When you're buying new construction, the tax quote may be very low because it's only based on land, not the land with the house already built on it. So you will see that change, but at closing, and the lender will also notify you how those adjustments will be done and how you can protect yourself from getting a crazy tax bill. Okay. And of course, I will go over that very thoroughly with you as well. Termination option. Most contracts have a termination option. We call it the option period. So from the time you go into a contract until so many days out, you have the unrestricted right to cancel as long as you pay for it. Okay. So you can buy the termination option. So the option, how much you pay and how many days is negotiable. Most buyers will get inspections done, negotiate repairs, and all of that has to happen before the end of the option. If you run out of time and you want an extension, we have to get it in writing. Okay. Tidewaters, we don't see in El Paso so much. So if it's near Tidewaters, the seller provide a buyer with the addendum for coastal area notice. Not here, honey. There's no Tidewaters. All right. Title insurance or abstract of title. So in Texas contracts, usually you'll get a title insurance. Okay. Who pays for it is negotiable. It'll show if there's any liens or any issues with title. In rare occasions, an abstract of title prepared by an attorney will be done, and it shows the chain of title. So that just protects you from anybody coming out from the woodwork saying, I'm a long lost, grandson, and I own part of this property, right? Or even a title policy will also protect you from like a pool guy coming back later and say, two owners ago, they built this pool and then never paid me. Now you have to pay me back. So title insurance protects you against things like that. Utilities. Certain people want certain internet companies, right? Or want certain utility companies. If that's the case for you, it's very important that you reach out to those companies and see if they provide service in that area because we cannot promise that. All right. All right. And even some structures may not have utilities or electrical facilities to support many appliances. So if you're buying a property that's really, really old, just know that maybe you have to upgrade the lines, or if you don't have the proper electricity run to the property, you may have to pay for that. Water level fluctuations. This is more for um, water with the storage capacity. Let's see, lake, reservoir. We have Tascarate Lake, but that's a man-made lake. And I don't know that that's something that you need to worry about, water level fluctuations, right? But you can always go to this website if to get a list of lakes and reservoirs, okay? Water wells. I've only dealt with water wells less than a handful of times, okay? So you should, if there's a water well, you can get testing. We need to get the information. The lender may require equipment inspection and water testing. And then finally, wire fraud. You're going to hear this a lot. So there's a lot of criminals trying to get access to accounts electronically through emails. They will hack into certain emails, get information, and then a buyer will get a phony email saying the wiring instructions have changed. That is a big red flag. If you ever get anything saying that banking information has changed, do not respond to the email. You pick up the phone and call me immediately. Okay. I've had situations where that's happened. So, this is the summary of the general information and notice to buyers and notice to consumers. If you have any questions, let me know and I'll be happy to go over it all with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.